Welcome to Puro Politics, the political podcast of the San Antonio Express News. My name is Gilbert Garcia, Metro columnist, and I'm joined by
City Hall reporter Joshua Fechter,
business editor and columnist Greg Jefferson,
reporter Brian Chasnoff.
And this is our first podcast in 2 weeks. And
the Danger Zone edition.
Yeah, that's right. Like a lot of you all, we've been working from home. This is my first time in the office in, I think, like 12 days or something like that. And it's a weird feeling. We're all going through social distancing in this effort to slow the spread of the coronavirus. And I mean, there's so many things that I think since we did the last podcast, there have been 3 municipal orders from both the mayor and the county judge.
3 sounds about right.
Yeah, you're just basically tightening restrictions on, on social interaction and on businesses. And the most recent one, the strictest one, this was stay home, work safe order from both Ron Nirenberg and Nelson Wolff. It was announced last week, and we're all sort of adapting to that. And Josh, I mean, you've been covering this story. I mean, in a nutshell, like what did this order do? What kind of restrictions did it put on San Antonio?
Well, if you don't know already.
Then that would be a problem because you've probably been like.
If you're getting your news from this podcast, then I don't know what to tell you. So basically, you're, unless you have to make sort of essential trips, like going to the grocery store, going and picking up a prescription, getting your car worked on, you need to go to a car wash.
More on that later.
I want to talk about that.
I'm sorry.
or to pick up some guns or liquor.
This is kind of an extended bit where it's like it turns out that the list of essential businesses is quite large.
The Texas edition.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's. I mean, one of the things that's interesting about this is the decision-making process and trying to determine. I'm sure there were some legal issues that were being worked out as far as what we can say are essential and what we're going to the exempt. Businesses that will be exempted, but
Well, I mean, like one thing that I'm noticing is when this came out last week. Was that just last week? It feels like a year ago, but
it's still March, by the way.
It seemed like they were prizing leniency over anything else. They're saying, we're not going to stop you if you're out there. Just we're counting on the residents to do the right thing.
The idea is that they did not want to fill up the jails with people who were, flagrant sort of violators or issue a bunch of fines. They wanted people to just behave and sort of fall into line on their own.
But then yesterday, my wife and I tried to just go to San Pedro Springs Park, just us, and sit down in the park to get some fresh air, and a cop came up and said, you have to be moving. You cannot sit in a park under the mayor's orders. And we were like, what? So we went home, and then I start seeing these stories that the mayor's threatening to shut down the parks. Mm-hmm. So it just feels like, again, like another instance of whiplash going from we're going to trust you guys to do the right thing to now you can't even sit down in a park.
Yeah, and the question is going to be, as far as enforcement, I mean, you can pull over pedestrians all you want, but I mean, if they're heading to a destination that's not essential, then that's the real issue. So at what point does the city, as Councilman Manny Pelaez was talking about in the council meeting last week, crack down on businesses that don't meet that city's very loose definition of essential?
He was saying put some heads on pikes.
Yeah.
That's really what he said.
That sounds to me like enforcement.
Right, yeah, maybe.
Well, and you mentioned car washes, and Brian, we were talking a little bit about this before.
The wash tub.
Yeah. What were you saw?
Well, I mean, I haven't actually gone to see it, but I've heard from multiple people complaining to me as a reporter saying you got to do something about the wash tub because we all know what they do there. It's just clusters of workers hand washing people's cars for them. And that seems, yes, it's exempt because car washes are exempt, but during a pandemic, shouldn't people just wash their own cars? I mean,
if we're talking about auto services, I realize people have
Or
cars break
automated
down.
car washes.
That makes sense as an essential service, and certainly people have to get gas. But do they really need to go to a car
and
wash?
Plus, I mean, hey, surprise, we live in a semi-arid region. We've had severe water restrictions in the past, And we've not had car washes, and we somehow managed to survive. So, like,
I mean, if I
why
can't
not
cut my hair,
Yeah, why not
get
this
my
time?
hair cut. you
Yeah,
know?
and that's the thing that's seems kind of contradictory. Like when I looked at, say, hair salons being shut down and lawn services being allowed, I thought, well, I guess you could make the point that people congregate at hair salons. You know, people are using scissors. People are like hovering over you, whereas lawn services, workers tend to be spread out over a yard. You're not creating the same situation, but. A car wash, that is the kind of situation.
Yeah,
that they
and
would
again,
worry
it's,
about.
it's just again this whiplash I was talking about. So you've got all these, maybe shut down the wash tub before you stop allowing people to take a walk in the park. I don't know.
Well, I was, I was taking a walk on the Riverwalk. We parked at the Pearl and walked, down. I can't remember. I guess to like wherever the new CPS headquarters is being built, and there were a bunch of people out and about along the Riverwalk, and then there were also the spot that used to be the luxury. There was. Whatever restaurant is there now is offering drinks to go and food to go, and there were still a bunch of people that were just like sitting out there, social distancing.
I think
So they
there's-
were going to one of the benches, 5 feet away from.
I think there's a good
kitchen,
chance that 3-4 weeks from now we're going to look back to this conversation and think how quaint that we were,
That's
because
how everything's gone.
Yeah,
in this,
because I mean, just look at Europe.
Yeah.
I mean, people aren't allowed. They're basically locked down in their home. Am I wrong about that? I mean, Parisians cannot leave the city.
Yeah.
It's getting really intense over there, and I don't see how we avoid that.
Right. And just for context, I mean, and we all know that the numbers we're getting are behind the reality because we've only just recently begun to ramp up testing in this community. And so we're still catching up on the numbers. But as far as confirmed cases between March 21st and 29th, in over 8 days, we went from 29 to like 157 cases locally.
And 5 deaths.
5 deaths. And so I think nationally, we went from like a little more than 1,000 deaths to about 2,500 in over a weekend, basically. And so the acceleration of this is just it's kind of shocking. And we had medical experts telling us this was going to happen, but it's still shocking to see. But as far as context, the day that Ron Nirenberg and Nelson Wolff announced that they were going to impose these new stricter restrictions, we had this kind of pushback that was starting to happen. We had Dan Patrick go on Fox News, and he was basically responding to Donald Trump the night before, tweeting, we can't let the cure be worse than the problem, meaning that we can't, that social distancing and shutting down businesses could potentially be more damaging to the country than the coronavirus could be. And Dan Patrick seemed to echo that and said, I'm about 70 years old, and I'm willing to put my
Take it
life
on
at
the
risk.
chin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My
Take it on the
generation
chin, yeah.
is, talking about my generation, and we're willing to risk the coronavirus to, so that young people can get their other jobs,
Oh,
which
thanks.
is easy for a millionaire to say.
Yeah.
So,
Not taking into account that, the 70-year-olds could also spread it around to other people, and also we've seen young people who have died from this, and so it's not as simple as that. But it created kind of a complicated situation, and I think that you saw Ron Nirenberg. I mean, he went on CNN, I think, the next day and was, pushing back pretty hard against this idea that it was that it made sense to sort of open everything up again.
Yeah, he was basically blasting him as I forget the exact verbiage he used, but I mean, he was basically saying like, well, yeah, easy for Dan Patrick to say. He's, as you noted, he's a millionaire.
Yeah.
And you're kind of seeing this sort of split between, sort of the state leadership and local and county officials on this. Governor Greg Abbott has so far declined to issue a statewide sort of stay-in-place order, and basically leaving, people like Mayor Ron Nirenberg, Bexar County Judge Nelson Wolff, Dallas County Judge Clay Jenkins, all of these folks to basically, leaving them on their own to make those sorts of decisions, and also like letting them handle
that could
the blowback.
But that could backfire on Abbott. I mean, let's be honest. If this state blows up,
Right.
I mean,
The thing about, I mean, Abbott, it was interesting because Abbott did not fall in line with Patrick on this idea that we've got to get back to work. He did say, he had a press conference and said, public health is the most important thing right now. But he, as you said, he would not impose a state order. And I've gotten emails from people, because I've written about this subject, who've said, Abbott's doing the right thing, and one size doesn't fit all, and some counties are, rural counties are not being affected by this. But as we've seen, I mean, New York City went from like one case. I think they had somebody who had traveled there, and one person got it, and that's all they had like a few weeks ago, and now they've got tens of thousands.
Of course, there were probably already thousands of people walking around with
That's
it
true.
at that time.
But I think that when you start having different restrictions from county to county, we've seen in other states that people will cross a county line and maybe go to a bar. Some of those people are going to come back, and they're going to spread this thing. And rural counties are, if it starts to spread in those places, are probably not going to have the hospital facilities, the medical facilities that some of the big cities have, and so they would have their own set of problems to deal with. So I look at it as that we need to have like a national policy, and we do have CDC guidelines for the country. That Donald Trump, by the time we recorded this, I mean, on Sunday night, he basically came around to this idea that no, we do have to maintain social distancing for at least till the end of April. But
before that, he wanted to open up the country by
right.
Easter.
Well, yeah, he's gone back and forth on this thing over the past week, and I think that one of the things that I felt was happening politically, and I don't want to make this about a partisan thing necessarily when we're dealing with this crisis, but I think you could see that beginning with Trump and with some Republican governors, there's been a tendency to not want to have the responsibility for the failure of the economy on them. So it's like, let these liberal mayors, let them impose the restrictions.
Well, judging by poll results, that seems to be working pretty well.
Yeah.
I mean, I was checking Real Clear Politics this morning for the national average on Trump's job approval. It's at 47%. I've never seen it that high.
Yeah.
I mean, there's only 2% more find, his job not acceptable.
And the real issue that's going to be interesting is what the long-term impact of this, because there has been a national tendency over the years. We saw this with 9/11. We saw it, even Jimmy Carter, who lost re-election in part because of the Iran hostage crisis. Initially, in the early months of that situation, I mean, he got a boost in the polls.
It's a rally around the flag effect.
Yeah, and so I think we're seeing some of that with Trump, and certainly he's on TV every day talking about this. I don't know what the long-term impact is going to be, but it might change. We don't know. Josh, you wrote about the issue of transparency with the city and how it's getting information out there about the cases and what is that situation like, and is it improving at all since you wrote about that?
Yeah. So before this weekend, I mean, there was a lot of I don't know how to describe this. Basically, like you would look at other cities and you would look at other counties, some of which are smaller than San Antonio and Bexar County. Some are, you would think would be sort of like less equipped for sort of the proliferation of data on COVID-19. And, what you sort of found was that, maybe San Antonio and Bexar County were not providing as much information on like what basically the state of the crisis is here. Before this weekend, they weren't telling us how many COVID-19 patients are on potentially like life-saving ventilators, how many are showing symptoms, where and when each patient individually was infected, which is something that Collin County and Lubbock have been able to do, how the region would respond to a surge of patients in hospitals. And until Friday, they weren't telling us how many people with the virus had been hospitalized. So it's been a little bit of a push and pull between local reporters in the city. I should also mention that KSAT has been pushing for this as well.
Right.
And it's the usual sort of if you're a reporter, this is something you encounter a lot is people citing various sort of federal laws to justify, not disclosing data. What their sort
so-
of big
Yeah,
They're
HIPAA
not-
is being abused hugely.
They're not
I mean,
giving the names of the deceased, right?
They're not. They weren't. There was a split second where they indicated that they were not even going to release the gender and the age range of those of the deceased, which was promptly sort of corrected. But I mean, there's just still so much that we don't know about sort of the extent of the virus here, like how many people have been tested by zip code is another one. There just seems to be like sort of these huge gaps in what we're getting right now that perhaps other counties and cities are capable of doing.
I was glad to see that they added the number of hospitalizations. That was I felt like that was egregious before when that wasn't being released.
Yes,
But-
and they were saying we could be violating HIPAA, and it's like clearly like cities and other cities and counties did not feel that way.
But they're not identifying the
It's
Right,
like-
yeah,
it's like,
there's
do you
no
thi-
identifying patient information.
No.
So that's
Yeah.
ridiculous. I mean, that assertion is just invalid, just total.
And it does.
BS.
It helps people realize the scope and the severity of the situation when you release that type of information. It's only going to help the city tamp down the outbreak, I think.
And arguably, I mean, the city only began releasing the additional information. Was it after your story posted? I mean, are we in a situation where they have to be shamed into their
It
jobs?
was Friday and Saturday was kind of my story posted Saturday afternoon. KSAT did their story Friday evening, Friday afternoon.
Right.
So they were getting kind of shamed into it.
Right. It sounds like they were totally getting shamed into doing their jobs.
I'm trying to pull up an email here. They're supposed to be releasing more information here in the next coming days. They provided us a list of what they're supposed to be putting out, and they've asked us, what else do you want us to provide, and we'll see what we can do. But
yeah, and we've come across this kind of Mayberry approach to information release in the past. It's just now it's really egregious in a situation like this.
yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that came up during last week's city council meeting was there was a briefing by Maria Villagomez, the deputy city manager, and she talked about the economic impact of the coronavirus. And I mean, just this past week we had a stimulus package, a $2.2 trillion stimulus package, which I think is about by margin of nearly 3-1 is the biggest in the U.S. history, and it's going to provide unemployment benefits to people for a period of time, and small business loans and assistance to states and local communities. And Greg, I want to get your thoughts on this because I mean I think there are different schools of thought. Obviously, I mean we've seen a devastating economic impact. There are some people who are arguing, and I think this has probably been the Trump argument, that this is unlike, say, 2008, 2009, when we had the financial sector kind of collapse and the housing market collapse. This was an intentional pause in the economy, and that we can then pick it up again, and everything will be back to normal. I mean,
I thought you were going in a different direction. No. I mean, the thing is, this is a completely different beast from the Great Recession and the financial crisis we saw in 2008. This, the efforts to contain this virus, it's almost like you couldn't think of a more perfect weapon to just wipe out the service industry. I mean, your travel restrictions, stay-at-home orders, all of those. I mean, they're taking consumers off the streets and keeping them at home. I mean, that's the death knell temporarily for the. It starts with the tourism industry.
Yeah.
But I mean, it spreads out quickly to as we've seen, restaurants and bars, and all of the small businesses that are now having to close their doors or find a way to do delivery or do deals on the sidewalk, and that's a huge.
I've seen a lot of restaurants shut down in my neighborhood.
Yeah,
I mean,
I think
that's the question. Will people be able to pick up where they left off?
I mean,
will the federal assistance? How much will that help?
I mean, the federal assistance. We'll see how much that helps. I mean, there's a tremendous, I think I'm trying offhand, I would say, billions of dollars in small business loans. The numbers escaping me. They're working out how to access those loans now, what the process is going to be. But locally, we had the Commissioners Court last week set up a $5 million fund with $250,000 of that available in grants. That is now, it's pretty much spoken for at this point. So that gives you some idea of the need. The problem is, large companies, they're in a better position because, if they're large, they've been around for a while, they've got credit lines they can draw on, so they can, and we've seen a lot of that. Bigger companies are drawing down their lines of credit just to have cash available, for whatever contingencies, and there are going to be a lot of contingencies coming up in the next couple of months. Small business owners, a lot of them don't have that luxury, and as Michael Taylor pointed out in his column today, a lot of them simply are not going to reopen. I mean, chances are they're not going to survive.
And we saw locally, and in our business, the San Antonio Current, the weekly, I mean, they laid off 10 people.
Yeah.
I think just recently, because so much of their business, their advertising base and everything revolves around nightclubs and
that hurt. I mean, I was editor of that thing about a year and a half ago, and a lot of their business is it's events advertising. And they also draw a good deal of their revenue from events themselves. I mean, they sponsor events, charge people to get in, and that's gone now.
Yeah. One last topic I wanted to get to, it has to do with our election situation. We had, with two elections that were coming up soon in May. On May 2nd, we had some municipal and school board races, and we also had a vote on renewing the 1/8 cent sales tax that funds the pre-K 4SA program, which was Julian Castro's legacy achievement. And May 26th, we originally had scheduled primary runoff elections. Those have been moved now to, I think it's July 14th. So we're seeing basically candidates just on pause. I've heard from people on the political scene who are just saying, their candidates are asking, what do I do? How do I campaign? And you have a lot of sort of antsy candidates who can't block walk. I mean, nobody's going to answer your door right now. And they're trying to do maybe some social media stuff. And
forget about asking for money, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's nothing I can imagine that would be like a more tone-deaf political message right now than say,
please give me your money.
Yes.
Even though apparently didn't Jeff Bezos ask for donations for his own workers? I read that somewhere.
Yeah. So that primary's been pushed back. So we're about 3 months away from that. Now, last week, the pre-K 4SA board voted to I think they voted to push back the May 2nd election to November, because Greg Abbott had basically allowed local entities to just move the election back to the November general election if they wanted to in this special case. Is the city council going to take that up soon, Josh?
Well, I believe they have to take it up this week. I have not seen the agenda for this week. They're meeting now every week for sort of like the duration of this crisis. But what's interesting about that is that they wanted pre-K 4SA renewal on the May ballot because they wanted to just totally get out of the way of like sort of the crowded November ballot.
Right.
And now that's back where they are. What I think is kind of like the big question mark in all of this is, what's sort of the game plan now for Connect SA? We still don't know basically how that's going to shake out.
Yeah, and I think there's something that public transit funding vote, which we've been hearing about, was going to happen in November. I mean, there has, I think, been some talk that because of the crisis that you might see a change in direction, that there might be maybe a vote instead to create additional funding to deal with COVID-19.
It's probably hard to get people excited about public transit at the moment.
I wouldn't be. I mean, we're still in the process of finding out, but I would not be surprised if the Connect SA or the public transit vote maybe gets pushed back 2 years. I mean, which I think it would be very frustrating for a lot of people involved. But it might that might be one of the casualties. There've been so many with the situation. the funny thing about the pre-K thing is, I mean, you see signs, you see campaign signs for it, because we were getting close to the election, and it's very possible now it's going to be 7 months away. It would be buried on the November ballot, which is not, as you said, what the people, Ron Nirenberg and others would like to see, but under the circumstances, how are we going to have an election now? I mean, we're still kind of working out how you would have an election in May under these circumstances with people practicing social distancing. So I think we're going to leave it there, and thank you all for listening, and we just hope you all stay safe, and we'll catch up with you next week. Take care.